What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here doing a technical analysis on our trending tickers for the day. On the left-hand side, we do have the daily time frame, and on the right-hand side, the 30-minute intraday time frame. First one up on the chopping block is going to be RIVN Automotive, and I do need to let you know they gave us an earnings announcement after the bell today. So let's flip on the extended hour session and see what's kind of going on with that number. Look at that bloodbath. You could see it from a mile away. Nice move to the downside with some price acceptance lower. They clearly missed the earnings expectation. So what do we have on the docket going forward? Again, it's very likely we open on some sort of gap down, but please keep in mind, a lot can happen between now and 9:30 when the bell actually rings, so please adjust accordingly. We want to know where the overnight low is, the anticipated opening print, and then today's low of day. From there, let's take a look at the daily time frame to talk about a couple of scenarios that could unfold and help us trade the opening bell. So with that being said, whenever we have a gap, scenario number one is the gap and trap. And what that looks like is opening here, failing to take out the overnight low, so no more sellers show up. We trade long back up through the open for a long signal to close the gap overhead. That would be from roughly 36 up to 40 inside of RIVN. So that's your long-sided trade here for the inventory correction based on the quote-unquote overreaction to the negative earnings news. That's if we get the gap and trap. And again, this is all based on the fact that we have shorts piling in late to the party that don't get paid if we fail to take out the overnight low. They panic, get out of the position, and close as we start to fill the gap overhead. So that's sort of the thinking behind why this trade unfolds. Obviously, if we get consolidation that accepts down here and we never take out that opening print, we're looking for a bearish move, so shorts underneath the overnight low for all-time lows inside of RIVN. This thing has been absolutely getting beaten up ever since it went IPO open. There's your sort of hockey stick move higher, absolutely in the gutter now. So there's nothing to target down underneath us. I would be very careful. If we come on over to the trade tab, let's see how the puts are looking on this. There's plenty of volume based on what we're seeing here. So puts are fine, and the spread is honestly really manageable. So if you did want to short it, you could do that. So look at puts in RIVN if we're getting some sort of downside play. So back on over to the charts here. Next up on the list is DOCU for DocuSign, obviously. Another earnings candidate. So these were the sort of the big three interesting ones for today's session. DocuSign, what was the other one? Oracle, maybe? Yeah, we'll take a look at that as the video goes on. So anyways, DocuSign, what's going on in the after hours bloodbath, just like we saw in RIVN. We're going to do the same exact thing. Apologies for the sort of redundancy here. However, it's just the setup that we follow, right? Whenever this happens, you don't change it based on the stock or, oh, I think I like DocuSign a little bit more, or, you know, I use DocuSign every day, so I'm not going to follow my strategy. It's not how it works, right? It doesn't matter what you feel about the stock. Use the strategy. It's going to save you 9 times out of 10. So anyways, if we open here, fail to take out the overnight low, fail to find new sellers or price acceptance underneath, that's where you're looking for longs back up through the open to fill the gap up towards 92. Okay, that's the long trade here inside of DocuSign based on the same premise that we just discussed on RIVN. If the people down here are getting overly short at poor location and fail to get a move in their direction, I don't think they want to hold it over the weekend. They're short-term traders looking to make a quick buck, just like we are, but we're trying to be a little bit smarter, right? We look for longs as they squeeze out of the position to fill the gap and again, take us to, or closer to at least, today's low of day, $92. Same sort of theory applies to the downside as well. If they're getting price acceptance and there's no reason to close out a short, even if you have bad location down here, look for follow through to the downside underneath 76 and a target underneath. If we go out to a weekly, I'm going to have to grab some more years here. It's been a while since DOCU has come down. Obviously, with the sickness sort of ramp up, there's not a whole lot of structure underneath us, right? So if it breaks the overnight low, I would start targeting this in here, roughly 65. Do I think it's going to make a $10 move to the downside on tomorrow's session? Not really. I don't really think that's going to be what unfolds, but that's technically the next structural level that we should be paying attention to. Next up, we're going to go right to ORCL for Oracle. Again, another earnings candidate. Let's put that back down on a daily. What do we have from the daily perspective in a downtrend? What do we have from the earnings perspective? Hey, a different story here. Surprise, surprise. Look at that nasty move, but retraced nearly immediately right back into today's range. So it's not abundantly clear to me whether or not this one will be opening on a gap up or a gap down for tomorrow. So we'll play it as it lies. We'll just assume it opens in today's range, but we do, of course, want to know where the overnight high is, and we want to know where the overnight low is, just for reference points. So from the daily perspective, because this is where we're going to sort of derive back to, right? Let's come in with a resistance trend line and just illustrate clear downtrend, right? If we open right at the highs, right at the overnight highs, we're basically opening at that resistance trend line. What I find interesting about this setup, though, is the fact that there's potential for this to hold as a higher low if we test that in short proximity of time, here to here, the resistance trend line, there's potential that it breaks and we change the daily trend, right? If we get a new higher high, we're looking for something over 79, and that could be in store if the earnings catalyst is strong enough to attract enough buyers. The other thing I like about this setup is the fact that we have 2 days of balance back to back, so there's plenty of potential energy. Think back to your physics class, building up in this area. As the longs start to get unleashed, you get people piling in, noticing the break of the 2-day range. You get the shorts who are speculating in this area, starting to cover because we're breaking out of the 2-day range, and obviously the earnings catalyst is just an excuse to, get more headlines out there, get more attention to the stock. I would expect volume to increase substantially. So 79 is the upside target. Anything above that shifts the daily trend to being back higher, noting that we would have higher lows and then a higher high, right? If something like that does unfold. To the downside, obviously a rotation to the bottom end of the daily range. Oops, the 2-day range. Let's grab the other tool, try that one more time. 74, 75, 75 even. If that breaks, don't push your luck. I wouldn't really target the overnight low, but I would target this right here, roughly around 73. This overnight low, the 70.25, is just coming from this prior support right here from the invasion panic day. Okay, so that's where the number's coming from. Maybe it's a target if all of this starts to break down, but I don't think that's going to be in store just based on the really strong buy side reaction. People came in here and were like, wow, look at that. Oracle's on sale. We're going to scoop it right back up immediately and prevent this thing from opening on a gap down, right? So that's my thinking, at least inside of Oracle and what we have for tomorrow's session. Gap rules won't necessarily be in play based on what we have in front of us here. Next up for our trending tickers are going to be VTNR. Not sure what this one is, but we're going to take a look. What do we have going on? Not an earnings candidate, so we're going to turn off the after hours session. This thing's been moving straight up. It's an energy company. Obviously, the XLE for the energy sector has been on fire with everything happening overseas and the supply and demand issues. Regardless, we're going to play the chart as it lies. We're not going to read into that too much. We've been up now aggressively 1, 2, 3 days in a row after an earnings catalyst as well. You can clearly see we've broken out of this prior bull flag. We're holding that on the pullback from that lower wick right there. There's nothing about this chart that's saying, hey, you need to short this. And I know it might be tempting to say, oh, wow, look at it. It's overextended. We got to start piling into shorts. We're at 9 the whole dollar. It's got to move lower, right? Well, there's potential that does happen, but I wouldn't try to fight this, right? You're fighting a lot of forces here. I don't really think it makes sense. If we look left on the daily, the only thing I say that this might have going for you if you are looking for the short is the fact that we are at prior structure from this really historic head and shoulders right here, broke the neckline, went on a nice move to the downside. So that's one thing you have going for you. If you're intent on shorting it, maybe look for shorts here, stop here, and you're only targeting the pullback low to the prior flag high. It's not like you want this thing to go all the way back down to 3, right? So keep the expectations realistic here inside of Vertex. Obviously, it's been screaming to the upside. Maybe a pullback comes, but I wouldn't really push your luck unless you can stay on a disciplined stop loss and respect that, right? Because if it takes that out, it's just going to continue to go off to the races, and you don't want to be caught up short at 925 and you find the stock at 1150, like as the weekend, over the course of the weekend. If there's any headline that comes out and we open 1150 or short 925, yeah, that's not going to be a pretty Monday morning for you. And just to quickly check, it actually doesn't look like you will be shorting this, at least on Thinkorswim. It's hard to borrow, and the puts here, absolutely pathetic volume, so I wouldn't really recommend looking for any downside in this name, just based on the actual mechanics of trying to get short in the first place. So that's VNTR. Obviously, if it moves higher, what's our upside target going to be? Well, looking left, there's not a whole lot of structure until we get up towards 1065. From the 30-minute perspective, let's just quickly take a Fibonacci reading from the low to the high here. Any pullbacks that hold 820, so something like this, bullish from the daily perspective. If we zoom in here, a couple of days of consolidation respecting today's low, 820, 38.2, nothing more than a bull flag once again stacking on top, exactly like what we had right here. From there, look for follow through up and over 925 if it eventually gets tested after a period of consolidation, okay? So that's VNTR. Next up, what do we have on the list? MVST, Microvast, MVST, there we go. What do we have on Microvast? Nice solid move to the upside. Let's go ahead and get rid of our old drawing sets. That's obviously no longer in play. We'll start with a new daily roadmap though, just making sure we have some of the basic levels in play here. So I'm liking that as our roadmap. You can clearly see the set of lower highs from here to here. That could potentially be the target if we get follow through to the upside. On any pullbacks, what are we looking for? Well, we're going to do the same thing that we just did on the previous company. If we take out the fibs from the low of the move to the high of the move, notice that the 38.2 is right here, today's low of day, but also the prior day daily structure at 825. Anything that consolidates up here is building a nice bull flag. From there, a breakout up and over 955 is bullish for the follow through into these levels at minimum, right? 1014. So that's the upside trade here. If we take a look at the 30-minute intraday time frame, let's quickly see what we have going on. Again, there's nothing about this chart that's screaming, hey, short me. Yeah, it might start to feel overextended, but it probably felt that way here. And yet again, we have another day to the upside. So just don't get caught in the trap of thinking, oh, this thing's got to come back down, right? Sure, it could, but just don't, if you get the timing wrong, it's really going to sting. Here's one potential thing to watch out for, the support trend line, right? If that breaks, maybe that's your advanced heads up and you can scalp it to the downside. But again, let's quickly check on the trade tab. So this is hard to borrow. You're not going to short the shares, and the options volume over here on the put side of things is absolutely horrendous. I would not look to short this either, just based on the mechanics. So even if it does break that support trend line and it looks like it's going to be a good short opportunity, there's no real way to achieve that, at least here inside of Thinkorswim. It would not be my first choice as something to be shorting. So that's MVST in a nutshell. You have the levels and my thoughts. Again, nothing about today's session would indicate any bearish activity. In the post market, we're 922, 940. So we're hanging out right up at those highs. It's not like there's been an aggressive move to the downside so far. Next up, we have NIO, good old NIO. What's going on in the car maker, the EV space? What do we have here? Taking a look at today's session, the exact opposite of what we got yesterday, right? So this is actually kind of funny. I mean, it's not funny if you're on the wrong side of it, so maybe I shouldn't word it that way, but picture perfect bull flag, literally something that belongs in a textbook. Now we have almost a picture perfect bear flag, something that belongs in a textbook. So incredibly hard to trade this. I mean, sure, the daily downtrend is firmly to the downside, but in terms of what the intraday patterns were suggesting, that was obviously a bull trade. This is now starting to suggest a bear trade, right? So anything that continues is going to be a rejection at that level. Let's zoom in on the 30. There we go. What do we have for a number? Anything that resists at 1775, bear flag consolidation underneath, look for continuation to the downside. If we can take it out, that does get a little bit more interesting for a retracement of this thin structure. Notice it was thin on the way down, thin on the way up as well. Sure, we have some consolidation from in the past, but because we have now this emotional move back and forth through it, we're going to start to focus on this, literally what's right directly in the rearview mirror, as opposed to all of this prior activity. Even back here, I mean, look at that. Fairly thin on the way up and down here, only getting more acceptance lower, closer to that 1850 and below. So to me, potential for a short squeeze up and over that level. It doesn't have to happen, but it's something to watch out for. If we remain below, lean on shorts for the breakdown and continuation of the daily trend to the downside, noting that we have highs, lower highs. This is nothing more than a lower high. We do technically have a new lower low on today's session, so we can afford any sort of lower highs once again. So even if we do bounce, it doesn't have the potential, at least as of right now, to change the daily trend. So that's NIO in a nutshell. We covered Oracle. Next up, we have BLNK, Blink. Charging. There we go. What's on the docket here? Let's clear up our old obsolete levels, turn on the after hours session. I believe this was an earnings candidate as well. So what do we have here? A big disappointment for a lot of people. Notice that there was this really obvious, if we grab the other tool, really obvious area of breakout right here. We also had a support trend line in place doing something like this. Oops, click, there we go. Higher lows, ascending triangle. Technically, it's not like this pattern's broken, but this is not the best thing for earnings, right? Clearly, big move to the downside. It's very likely we open on some sort of gap down for tomorrow, but just keep in mind a lot can happen between now and 9:30. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to stick to our framework, right? So there's your overnight low. There's the forecasted open. Here is yesterday's low of day. On the daily time frame, look at your risk reward here. This one doesn't make sense to trade for a gap fill, right? If you think about where your risk technically is, again, your stop would be underneath the low of day or the overnight low, and you're trading for this move right here. That's about a 1-to-1 or even a negative, like 0.9-to-1. It just doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't really watch for that trade unless you have a better target all the way back up to the top of the range, and that's probably not a day trade, right? That's more of a swing trade style setup. So if we get into the support trend line, sure, I wouldn't fault you for saying, okay, if we're going to continue on our trajectory here and continue to produce higher lows, maybe there's potential that there's a long in here at 23, but we don't know if that's going to happen yet. If we print a hammer candle on Friday's session tomorrow, and then early next week we take out the high, then yeah, I wouldn't call you crazy for looking back towards the top of the range, but we just don't have that information yet, so I wouldn't push your luck with longs on tomorrow's session. To the downside, I also wouldn't push your luck with shorts, just noting everything that we just discussed, opening very close to that support trend line, or if we break the overnight low rather, right to that support trend line. I mean, you're looking at about $1 move here. I don't know what the options are like inside of Blink. Let's take a quick look. There's some okay volume in here. There's some okay volume, but it's really not something that I would look to trade. The spreads aren't that great. They look to be about 18 cents here, 8 cents here. 5 cents here. I don't know. It just wouldn't be my first choice. And again, the only really attractive strike was this one at 25 for the puts at least. And again, just not on my list of, hey, I'm going to run out there and short this because it looks really good. Hard to borrow. You're not going to short the shares. To me, Blink's probably just, if you want to watch it for a long into next week, watch to see if it holds here, roughly 22.75 for the rotation back to 25.60. That's about the only setup I see here inside of Blink. And then obviously this pressure cooker top, if and when it breaks, where's our target after that? Well, let's take a look at the daily. There's going to be a little bit of overhead resistance almost immediately, actually, if we take out our other tool here. Reason I say that is because if you look at this, we have support, then flipping to resistance in that upper wick. If we can clear that, so 26.50, then maybe it opens up a little bit more. But again, it's very incremental targets here inside of Blink. It doesn't look fantastic, to be quite frank with you, to the upside. Now, there could be some massive catalyst that comes out that no one knows about just yet, and we put in a bar that looks like this. But again, we just don't know that, right? If you look at this chart and in hindsight, you see this big bar and you're like, oh, this guy's so stupid. He's saying that it's going to be tough to move to the upside. Well, I'm sorry that you just don't understand that, you can never predict a news event, right? So if that happens in hindsight, sure, call me the idiot. I'm the one who didn't catch it, but guess what? Could also do something like this, right? So that's what we've got here inside of Blink. A little bit of a rant there. So anyways, ULTA, next up, earnings candidate as well. If we zoom in on this guy, what do we have going on in the post market? Let's clear up the daily as well. It's a little distracting with all those levels. So there's your pressure cooker top, almost identical to what we just saw in Blink. Support trend line's not really there. And I know I was kind of stretching it as well with Blink, but maybe something like that. It's pretty far away. Nonetheless, what's going on with earnings? Overnight low way down here. We want to know where that is. Just as an FYI, a heads up level, that's at 355.15, and currently we're slated to be actually opening on a gap up right at this pressure cooker top level. So to me, what I would watch for tomorrow in ULTA is, can we get a hold in the upper 38.2 of yesterday's range, or even better, above the breakout point, today's high of day and the daily level, right? So if we do something like that, as long as we're above this number, 375, fine. So that would look like this on the daily, and then potentially into next week it's a break, or if we open above and we hold above that breakout point, which is technically 382.30s, so something that does this in the morning, look for follow through to the upside, right? That definitely would be a breakout of this overall range. If we look left, there's not a whole lot of structure in here. First target would be this gap area. I wouldn't say trade for the gap to actually fill, but just start to monitor this number, 393, as your upside target. Anything above that, 400 psychological will stand in the way before we get up towards these highs closer to 420. So that's what we've got in ULTA. The other stocks on our trending list are coins, crypto coins. We're not going to take a look at those, but we'll do a couple of other ones. So LCID for Lucid. What do we have going on in here? No earnings candidates, so we're going to turn that off. And we're going to take a closer look at the price action on the daily. Not that close. There we go. So let's put our daily balance back into play. Something that does this. Something that does this. Where are we? Well, we're right in the midpoint of a balance, right? So whenever we're at the midpoint, you guys know this by now, this is not where your edge exists. The edge exists here for a breakout into the prior balance, something here, or mean reversion, right? Something that does this. But as of right now, in the midpoint of the range, doesn't strike me as a clear setup. Instead, what I would be patient for is, okay, we're starting to get the phenomenon of higher lows. If we can reattempt the top end, again, get to the edge of the balance, that's where your edge exists. After a set of higher lows, it's starting to become a little bit of an ascending triangle. Watch for the break to do something like that here inside of Lucid. Obviously, if we get here and roll over, you're short with a stop loss over the top, and you would only know that based on an intraday double top, intraday head and shoulders. Could just be a simple inverted hammer here on the daily that prints, and then the next day you're short under the lows. Your rotation is to the bottom of the daily range, 22.27. So that's ultimately going to wrap up our video. I guess we'll take a quick, brief look at the 30-minute intraday. And again, you'll just get the sense, if I even just draw in the midpoint of the range right here, you can see how it's acting as a bit of an inflection point all these different times. But what are you going to do? You're going to place a stop here and trade for that? Maybe if you're an intraday scalper, that makes sense from a risk-reward perspective. But I would say your chances of that working are closer to 50-50 as opposed to skewed with more statistical edge when you get to the top of a given range for something that looks like that, okay? So that's what we've got in Lucid. That's going to wrap up the video officially this time. If you enjoyed it today or learned anything new, let me know in the comments section or by giving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget our main channel is linked in the description. And all of that being said, I wish you a green trading week.